right. Thank y'all for coming out. Hopefully more people will show up. And how many people have heard of Jenny Lynn before I start talking? What do y'all know about her? Singer?
She had a beautiful voice, like I forget what, nightingale or something?
The Swedish nightingale.
Okay.
Yeah. She was kind of one of those names I would see on historical markers all the time. And I'd find a marker, saying she sang in Nashville. There was also talk about her singing in Clarksville. And she was also at the old Gray Hotel in Tiny Town. And you've been to the room?
No.
Okay, I've always wanted to see the room they had there dedicated to her. And then also in Robertson County, and then Franklin, and Bowling Green. And I was just kind of curious, why did she completely miss Russellville when she was like touring here? And so that sent me down a rabbit hole trying to figure out who Jenny Lynn was, because she was one of those people I always heard by reputation. Didn't really know anything about her. Have any of you guys seen the movie with The Greatest Showman starring Hugh Jackman?
What was it?
The Greatest Showman, about P.T. Barnum.
Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with the movie. I don't think I saw it.
Hugh Jackman plays P.T. Barnum, and he's the one who brought Jenny Lynn to the United States. And she's played by Rebecca Ferguson in the movie. A lot more glamorous, in that movie than she was in real life. And they added kind of like an affair between Barnum that didn't happen at all, but just for dramatic tensions. But she was touring the United States, and she comes to Nashville. And I'm going to start with that. Well, I'm going to start with her coming to the United States. She caused a sensation when she came to America on a tour, arranged by showman P.T. Barnum, in a decade before the Civil War. American experienced what was called Linda-mania, Jenny Rage, or the Jenny Lynn Crush. It's been compared to Beatlemania, but it was much bigger. If you put the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, and the Olympics all together to come into a city, you have an idea of how popular she was. This popular Swedish opera singer of the 1830s and 40s, Johann Maria Lynn, better known as Jenny Lynn, or as the Swedish Nightingale, she was a soprano who not only sang ariados, but popular and folk tunes that made her music accessible to a wider audience. No one ever heard her sing Home Sweet Home without crying, according to the Century magazine. Lynn's concerts attracted huge crowds, but her audience extended far beyond the walls of the concert hall to include thousands who never heard her sing. They observed Lynn as much as through the newspapers, magazines, and books, according to Shirley Lynn Lincoln, who wrote much about Lynn's American tour and how it was covered in print media. A lot of people knew more about Jenny Lynn in the United States back then, through print. Very few actually got to hear her sing. And so like today, we only have a chance to know her through her print materials about her. Recording materials didn't exist then, so there's no recordings of her. So had to go by people's words of what they thought about her. Before coming to the United States, Lynn's name was familiar to Americans, even to Louisvillians. But unless they traveled to Europe, they would not have heard her voice. Because Lynn was an ethereal figure in America, P.T. Barnum capitalized on that to bring her here. To recover the expense, he created a public relations blitz. Singing contests were held, and prime tickets for her concerts were given a competitive auction. Newspapers and magazines competitively covered her from time to time, almost on a daily basis. The publications also shaped the image of her as the ideal feminine virtue. Stories of her growing up in poverty to become an international success through hard work and luck resonated with Americans. The accounts of her losing her voice and regaining the ability to sing gave her a mythical quality. Her popularity, as critics even noted, according to Lincoln, had more to do with Lynn's character than with her voice. As P.T. Barnum is credited as saying, "It's a mistake to say the fame of Jenny Lynn rests solely on her ability to sing. She was a woman who would have been adored success if she had sang like a crow." After her voice show in New York, at the New York Tribune declared her the greatest singer we have ever heard. Not everyone was an admirer. Emily Dickinson, the poet, regarded her that people were more fascinated with her than her music. A few of the prominent people who came to hear her were President Millard Fillmore, Washington Irving, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Daniel Webster, and even the great Kentucky statesman Henry Clay, who arrived at her New York show late. And that's her right there. That's Barnum. And that's her arriving, and the crowd who's coming to see her. And this is an ad showing Henry Clay meeting Jenny Lind, who was used for an advertisement for a whiskey, Old Crow.
Was she from England?
She was from Sweden. Clay was not the only Kentuckian to hear the Swedish Nightingale during her Washington tour. John J. Crittenden, who serves as Attorney General, attended the first night with President Fillmore. So at least one person with connections to Russellville did hear her sing. He may not be the only one. One Kentuckian who refused to hear her was Joseph R. Rogers Underwood, the U.S. Senator from Bowling Green. In a letter to his wife, Elizabeth, he called the craze around her as a folly, refusing to be associated with what he thought was a money-making scheme started by Barnum. Elizabeth marked that her daughter Jane had hoped that he had heard her sing and wanted to know what you thought of her performance. Elizabeth added in her letter, "I hope that the people of the district would not make themselves a great fools of themselves in the northern cities." Lind started her tour in New York in September of 1850. And afterwards, she stopped in Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Richmond, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, before sailing to Havana, Cuba. She returned to the United States to sing in New Orleans. She sailed up the Mississippi River, stopping at a church on the town of Natchez. And everywhere she went, she was met with enthusiasm. Her next stops was Memphis and St. Louis, where she took a boat, the West Newton, to Nashville. And this is what the focus of this presentation is going to be, is her trip between Tennessee and Kentucky. An agent, possibly LeGrand Smith for Barnum, had arrived around March 7, 1851, to arrange for a diva to perform in Nashville. Our city is more able and willing to pay liberally for her wonderful melody than any other place double the size. From the well-known taste and refinement of its citizens, we may expect the attendance of all we can obtain admission, according to the Nashville City Intelligence, a newspaper. Fear arose that the Swedish Nightingale might not perform because no building could seat 1,500 people. A tobacco warehouse was rejected, and Barnum wasn't able to employ any of the churches. Barnum reported that Lind would not be singing. The Nashville City Intelligence lashed out at the churches, allowing for the city to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We think it extremely ridiculous and irreconcilable what the dictates of consistency to refuse a room for the purpose universally concealed to be sinless and entirely moral. These same persons would doubtlessly be quite willing to attend and hear Jenny Lind sing in any other building, and probably equally willing to pocket a portion of the magnificent charities for which the notable-hearted girl showers upon the benevolent institutions wherever she goes, but profess to see a terribly impropriety in permitting their buildings for the scene of a divine melody. J.J. Hopper of Lebanon, Tennessee, recommended in the newspaper in jest that she could come to his town. "My headquarters shall be thrown wide open to her." He admitted, "It's astonishing that any place, church or what, should be deemed too holy for Jenny to occupy. But there's no accounting for the bigotry of these isms." When he means isms, he's talking about all like, Methodism, baptism, stuff like that. "Why, I religiously believe that Jenny Lind is doing more to bless mankind and benefit the world than any score of preachers in existence." This gives you kind of an idea of just how fanatical people were about her. Barnum reversed his decision when a newly built Adelphia Theater, that's a picture of it in later days, it was called the Bijou at that time, would showcase her. A third tier of seatings would be added. Nashville papers informed merchants of what an economic boom she would be to the city and encouraged them to advertise in its paper. Citizens were encouraged to manifest their appreciations of this opportunity for listening to the most celebrated of singers. Still, some residents were convinced that Lind wasn't coming, and the Nashville papers had to keep reassuring them and report on the progress of the Adelphia. So as Jenny Lind was coming here, the Adelphia was building, on his theater to keep it compatible for what she wanted. Even though the churches refused to allow her to sing there, they turned a blind eye to the violations of the Blue Laws. James Thomas wrote in his autobiography, "The intervening Sunday must have been forgotten, as the workmen could be heard the same as any other Saturday. They worked until the man in charge said, 'All ready except the paint.' He was told, 'Never mind the paint, it wouldn't dry before she comes.' When she arrived, it created a great media sensation. The excitement running high was ever before known in Nashville. A Memphis newspaper reported, every hotel and boarding house in the city was full, and people were still coming to hear her. You can imagine what a crowd we had, the Memphis newspaper reported of her Nashville arrival. The square and streets around the square were thronged almost equally to Broadway for almost the entire population of the surrounding county. Both village, town, and hamlet are now with us, and some neighboring states. The rooftops were crowded with anxious gazers, so reported a Virginia newspaper. The Clarksville Justinian also reported a great crowd was upon the suspension bridge and levees to get a sight of the singer. She came from a boat and entered a fine carriage, which was in waiting to carry her to her apartment at the city hotel. Such excitement was never witnessed here. Strangers were coming in by the hundreds. Great difficulties in experiencing and getting lodging. Barnum and the rest of the staff stayed at the Veranda Hotel. Hotels doubled their rates, which resulted in a few sundry sparring matches, they called it. What makes this all the ironic is that when Jen first arrived in the United States, the Nashville American poked fun at this Linda mania. Such clatter, what's the matter? New Yorkers are all rushing to a foam. Seeing them rushing, crowd crushing. Jenny's come, Jenny's come. And now that she was in Nashville, the newspapers were embracing the madness, having such statements as, Jenny is coming. Jenny Lind is coming to town. Ooh la la, no, da kata ha. Hush, hush, hush. An auction was held at the Oddfellows Hall for premium tickets, which Barnum described as spirited. G.W. Hamner served as the auctioneer. C.G. Rosenberg, an English author who wrote a biography on her and accompanied her on this tour, described bidding for the choice sittings as underwhelming, saying one premium seat only sold for about $200, which was higher than actually was sold in St. Louis. And that one went to a G.J. Turner, the owner of the Veranda Hotel. And in today's money, that'd be about $7,000. Can you imagine paying $7,000 to see someone perform? The lowest price for a ticket was $5, which would be about roughly a little under $200 today's money. A 10-cent admission price was charged for people to actually attend the auction, and those proceeds were given to the mayor for the benefit of the local orphanage. The Jenny Lind fever, according to the Clarksville Justinian, is raging amongst all classes of society. All the seats of her concerts are being sold today and more in great demand. Every stage brings a fresh arrival of disappointed expectants. It is said that Jenny Lind will give a charity concert in Nashville. The Clarksville Justinian wrote, we would suggest that a portion of the receipts be handed to the local Whig leaders in the city for the purpose of putting an additional leg or two under the Whig platform. It seems as a very rickety concern, and we fear they will tumble over before election. If there ever was a charity concert, it was not getting recorded. She performed her 66th and 67th concerts on March 31st and April 2nd, 1851, with a matinee at the Adelphia Theater and what is today 4th Street Avenue and Charlotte Avenue. Each concert would have different songs. The piano was provided by Mr. Wett's Music Store. The piano was described as a Nuns and Clark, meaning it was built by the brothers Robert and William Nuns and John Clark in New York. However, after the concert was over, Nashville manufacturer Mazur El Guitar boasted he actually made the piano. He is a very worthy, industrious man and deserves liberal patronage, the Republican Banner reported. Because construction was still going on, the Adelphia Theater was not in ideal shape for the concert for such a celebrity. Rosenberg said the doors had been removed and not replaced. The plastering was falling in spots, and the walls were leaving large, yawning holes. Scaffolding was still up. Ladders were leaning against pillars that support the boxes. Men were still hammering. He described the theater as unfinished and comfortless. This is not the first time she actually sang at theater as being remodeled to accommodate her. What, however, care the individuals of Nashville who throng to it, if, for this, Rosenberg wrote, their object is not to see the theater. They do not care for sitting at their ease. They only care to hear or see what the Swedish Nightingale was doing. Jenny herself, he continued, was a reigning attraction of the hour, and they were blind to everything but her, as they were deaf to all but her voice. Her singing was the best ever heard in Nashville, according to Joseph Con Gill, a lawyer from Gallatin. Miss Jane Thomas, who attended the concert with W.P. Handy, recounted years later, You know, the Jenny Lind was small and slender. The night I heard her sing, she was dressed in a pink slip made very simple. She sang The Last Rose of Summer and one or two other songs. The Echo Song was especially beautiful, and when she was singing it, her throat would swell up like a bird's, and you could hear the notes die out in the distance, just the exact imitation of an echo. The Nashville Daily American gave her a glowing review. As a singer, she possesses marvelous, refined, delicate voice, many of the finer qualities of which is cultivated to the extent which may be regarded as well-nigh incredible, and may be the most, in specs, be considered as nearly perfection as anything can be. The extreme bust of her voice in the upper portions of it register far beyond the ordinary range of sopranos, and she has, as we understand, by long and audacious practice, acquired the power of molding the higher notes entirely as well. One critic, John L. Maring, editor of the Nashville Gazette, confessed that he regarded Linda Mania as magnificent humbug, enacted by a master humbugger, but stated her concerts are superior to anything of the kind which American public has ever heard. He added that Jenny Lind herself has been magnified out of proportions to her merits. Still, Marlin was in the minority. Dubbing her as the queen of modern song, Nashvillians had become infected with Lind mania. Our city is now so completely moved from its ordinary quiet habits that it seems no longer the same modest and tranquil place. So reported an unidentified person in the Louisville Journal. Not everyone was white who attended the concert. One former slave and a successful barber, James P. Thomas, stated he and several blacks went to hear one of her concerts. Considering the demand for space, Thomas wrote in a singular style in his autobiography, I consider my chance for Miss Lind was poor until Mr. Barnum came to my relief for about 12 persons in my fix. Mr. Barnum said he could have standing rooms in the wings of the stage of the theater, and that chance was taken advantage of thankfully. $3 was charged. Thomas was not disappointed by what he heard during the first concert. We were there on time. The audience was closely packed. We could see the whole house. Fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, grandmothers were all gathering. It formed a beautiful audience, prompted on the hour of orchestra filled out from the opposite side from where we stood and took the respective positions. Then the conductor walked out, Jules Benedict, and took the elevation in front of the music. The orchestra played the overture of La Dame Blanche, and it was a very pleasing matter. Benedict disappeared after the curtain, soon returned leading Miss Lind. Her presence brought prolonged applause. And that's a painting that Allison Lyon did for me, reenacting the events in Nashville for the concert. And she did it just for this. And there's another version up there. The day after the concert, the main topic of discussion was about her. One old gentleman, as Thomas described him, at first called the show humbug, but corrected himself. He clarified that no good singer is humbug, but he believed Nashville possessed many women who could sing just as well as Lind. Her thin lower notes were debated and argued. Another professional man, recounted Thomas, said his wife was very much pleased. Among other things, he said his ticket cost him $40. And when he had left, another man who had been listening to the conversation remarked that nobody in particular, that the doctor had better pay his debts before paying $40 for a concert. When a young man spoke and said, you have a queer notion now because a man owes a few dollars that he must deny every pleasure until you are paid. Is that your idea? Thomas remarked that after Lind left Nashville, the mania stayed. Any small articles, such as gloves or handkerchiefs, that Lind left on purpose or by accident, then became the property of chambermaids and was for sale, and there was no trouble finding a purchaser, so I've heard. The guest of the hotel that happened to be given the apartment that had been occupied by Miss Lind regarded it as a great favor. The Nashville American published in the April 2nd edition of an alleged April Fool's prank pulled by Barnum. Showman obtained blank telegraph forms written on envelopes. The fake messages were sent to his staff. LaGrange Smith, who traveled ahead to smooth out arrangements, received a report that his native village in Connecticut was in ashes. Musicians were promised pricely salaries if they went to work at an opera. Others were offered astonishing liberal offers of engagements from banks and other institutions in the North. One father to be was informed that his wife had gave birth to twins. Neither Barnum or Rosenberg mentioned this prank in their books when they recount this event. The Nashville American may have been pulling a prank on his own readers when they did this one. Adriana St. Pierre of the Barnum Museum said the king of humbug was not known for pulling pranks, at least as an adult. As a youth, he did. Some exhibits at Barnum's American Museum at the Fiji Museum might be called a prank, but there was a fine distinction. Barnum called what he did humbug, which he saw them as merely harmless, while he regarded pranks as cruel hoaxes. And sending a telegram to the Grange Smith about his town being destroyed would be considered a cruel event. Given that if Barnum saw this questionable article, he probably saw no reason to have it retracted. Pierce said Barnum accepted publicity even if it wasn't accurate, as it got his name out there and if it made people curious or made them talk. He felt it was in the service of promoting his business and enterprises. This was not the only incident where fact and fiction blurred together. The city of Clarksville likes to brag that Jenny Lind heard about the Dunbar Cave in his town and hired a carriage to drive her to its feature. She, with her Italian pianist, were supposed to have sung The Last Rose of Summer as a way to test the cave's acoustic, using smoke from a lantern or a cave. The Swedish Nightingale signed Jenny Lind 1851 on a cave wall. In 1950, a statuette of her was installed in a portion of the cave named the Jenny Lind Auditorium, near where she wrote her name. A black light was used to show her the artistry of the sculptor who made the three-dimensional character that seemed to come to life in almost in a fairy-like scene. After the cave was closed, vandals broke in and destroyed the statuettes. This trip to Nashville is an utter fabrication. It's not true. There is no contemporary account of her ever visiting the city, which is odd considering how well Clarksville newspapers covered everything else about her appearances. Her steamboat did stop in Clarksville when it was traveling to Nashville, but it only docked for 45 minutes, and Lind never stepped outside to see the people. The first mention of her being at Dunbar didn't occur until 1916, and it wasn't until 1984 that the Montgomery County Historical Society stated that she never visited or sang here. Still, that doesn't stop the tale from being told about her coming there. The proprietors of the Franklin House Hotel claimed she visited there and even made a concert on Franklin Street. Lighted by coal-foot lights and cane-bottom chairs, the big audience heard the great singer, according to a Leaf Chronicle article from 1940. The hotel possessed a 9-foot-tall oval-shaped mirror festooned with gilded grapes and leaves. Lind is claimed to have carved J. Lind on the mirror to prove to the children of the proprietor that the diamond ring on her finger was real. Only in Clarksville does Lind ever sign her name in such fashion, whether it be in a mirror or a cave wall. The myth of her Clarksville trip doesn't stop there. Tales exist that she stopped at the Stagecoach Inn in Graysville, aka Tiny Town, and Todd County after the Clarksville show. The family of Edmund Ware would have been owners then. Actually, the inn claims that both her and Barnum stayed there. She reportedly sang from the balcony before departing the next morning. Her ghost is still claimed to haunt the place, as well as the Bell Witches. The story of her stagecoach stop didn't start appearing in print until 1957. The date of her arrival at that inn is supposed to be April 6, which is a very important date to remember for future events here. Although some historians say Miss Lind couldn't have stayed at the inn, according to Leaf Chronicle, the legend persists, and the room that she was supposedly spent the night in is still known as the Jenny Lind Room. We don't know if it's true or not, quoted Willie Northington, then co-owner of the Stagecoach Hotel with her husband Thad, then interviewed for Leaf Chronicle, but we heard that legend all our lives. In truth, Jenny Lind took a different route from Nashville. Immediately after the second concert, Lind and a small group left the Music City. Barnum did not join her in this trip. He instead took a steamboat to on the E.W. Stevens from Nashville to Louisville to her next scheduled concert. One account says that the April Fool's prank of 1851 played on the staff irritated her, and she wanted nothing to do with Barnum after that. But in truth, Lind desired to see something in Kentucky. She purposely took a stagecoach because she wanted to see something here. Her traveling companions were Julius Benedict, her German accompanist and conductor and composer, Josephine Almason, her Swedish companion and cousin, Genevieve Bellitti, an Italian operatic baritone, Joseph Burke, her piano player, Max Hoichberg, her secretary and cousin, and Charles Satan, personal ticket auditor and treasurer. Benedict wrote a brief account of the trip. Her last show in Nashville started at 8 p.m. The time might have been taken to do the show, may have been 2 hours. If everything was already packed and she didn't change her clothes, she could have left Nashville by 10 p.m. Realistically, it may have been like 11 p.m. or midnight. She traveled in a stagecoach on the Louisville and Nashville Turnpike. American poet Baylor Taylor praised the Turnpike as one of the finest roads in the United States, broad, smooth, and thoroughly mechanized. Benedict might argue with Taylor's description. Our road was rough, and in some instances almost impossible for a carriage. One blessing he saw was that the rain had kept the dust down. This would not be an easy trip. Their destination was 97 miles away, and the stagecoach traveled an average of 45 to 60 miles a day. This is why Lynn and her party left early. They stopped at the Tyree Springs, a mineral springs resort near Robertson County, for a luncheon. On the north side of Spring, a stagecoach made a stop by a spring, according to one legend. The exact location can be a bit confusing. It was more than likely the infamous Cheek Tavern, also called Rock Rest, then owned by Daniel F. Carter. But others insist that it was another home a short distance away called Tanglewood, across the county line into Sumner County, near modern-day Portland, Tennessee. Benedict doesn't mention stopping at either one of these. According to legend, John Burton, who owned Tanglewood, met Lynn when she stopped there. The Swedish Nightingale offered to sing for a drink from the spring, which he accepted. Reportedly, her silvery voice rang out through the forest to the eternal shame of the mockingbirds and all other singing creatures. The account also said Barnum was with her, but if we take it at face value, this account may have happened. He might have got him confused with Charles Satan. One of the people who allegedly heard her sing was a Mrs. James Bradshaw. John Button was an early settler of the Portland area, and he had his own home in an area called Wingate Mansion. Even though John is credited as the owner of Tanglewood, family history states it was actually built by his son, William, and he was the owner of the 5,000-acre estate. A big Georgian house was built about 1830. A spring house may have been where Jenny Lind stopped. John Button and his family had a family connection to the Rock Rest too. His daughter Mary married Daniel Carter. Rock Rest was their county home, and their city home was at the corner of 6th Avenue and Union Street in Nashville. They served as a stagecoach stop. Lynn could have met them there when she was leaving the city, and they could have recommended them to stop at her county house. We don't know. Adding more to the confusion, the people of White House, Tennessee, a city that straddles between Robertson and Sumner counties, claims that she stayed at a 2-story inn that the city is named after. Some accounts say Barnum was with her too there. Susan Holcraft, coordinator of the White House Inn Museum, only thinks Lynn passed through the White House Inn to stop instead stopping at Tyree Springs. She heard that Lynn saw children playing on the way, stopped the stagecoach, stopped to them, and would sing to them. Benedict never mentioned White House either. The Daughters of the American Revolutionists in Tennessee erected a bronze marker near the Button Farm in 1935 to memorialize the scene of her last song in Tennessee. The marker has since disappeared. Some reports say it was damaged by farmers. It may be because the marker had an error stating that she came here in 1852. The error was noted in the March 25, 1851 Tennessean, and that may have motivated people to have the marker removed. Her next stop was in Franklin at the Stanford Duncan Inn. George Washington Whiteside, an attorney of Simpsons County judge, is quoted after his death of seeing her. He is stated as saying her stagecoach stopped for needing repairs, which took hours. To pass the time, she sang to the people in the square, near where McLean Way McGuire Banking Company stood. It may have been a blacksmith shop at that time. Whitesmith, at the age of 8, is supposed to have been part of the audience. Another accounts say that he heard her at the Button Farm in Robertson County. Another version in the July 22, 1928 Franklin Faber stated the stagecoach reached Franklin. She stepped out of the vehicle and for the edification of the townspeople gathered about rendered a couple of songs that held the audience spellbound. After singing for the folk, Jenny Lind re-entered the stagecoach and drove away. But those who never heard her got tired of telling of that experience. The legend of her over time has changed. The current story goes that she didn't sing on the square, but in the Opera House in Franklin. The citizens of Franklin planned to erect a marker at the spot where she allegedly sang on the square, but it's unclear if that ever happened or not. Some people say there was one, but it was taken down. Benedict doesn't mention stopping in there, but we do have evidence that she did. One fellow known as Will mentioned in a letter to his sweetheart, Amanda B. Woodley, about Alinda's stop in Franklin. I'm told she didn't get out in the stagecoach, and that was too bad. She ought to have gotten out and let the natives have a peep at her. Will had seen her when her and her party dined in Bowling Green, or as he described it, took tea. Where she dined is not known, but tradition says that it was at the Moorhead House Hotel at the corner of Main and State Streets. A crowd reportedly showed up to see her. A boy in the crowd expressed a wish to see her. Lynn must have heard him, and she turned and smiled at him. She is also believed to have stayed there overnight, but that is unlikely. This is one of the few places associated with her where there's no legend of her singing there. Will, in his letter to Woodley, wasn't impressed with Lynn. He described her as a very homely woman, adding, she may sing well, but she's not pretty. Lynn herself would admit that she was not beautiful, telling people she had a potato nose. She didn't dress for the fashion of the times, and she didn't do much for her hair. Her appearance was mentioned in reviews of the Nashville concert. Jeannie Lynn is, whatever you may say of her beauty, by the enthusiastic admirers of her songs, is by no means a handsome woman. However, when she's saying people found a bit different beauty of her to admire, the beauty of Jeannie Lynn is not physical beauty, the Nashville Review continued. It resides in the heart that is everywhere visible, her pleasant yet homely contentiousness. Betsy Golden Killam of Vanity Fair wrote a piece of the singer stating, crowds loved that Jeannie Lynn did not seem to be performing a fiction so much as telegraphing herself truly in all her innocence and grace. While the Moorhead House Hotel had no claim of her singing there, another location, the Lost River Cave in Bowling Green, does. Lynn visited the cave during a brief time period in the Civil War era, according to a press release. She even declared it as one of the most beautiful places. This account didn't start until the late 20th century. Benedict made no mention of such a visit, and it is unlikely she stopped there. She had another landmark she wanted to see first. Still, Lost River used the claim to the flame. An underground tour boat was christened after her. She is believed to have visited another place in Warren County. Jonathan Jeffries, forming the Special Collections Library at Western Kentucky University, heard that the stagecoach stopped at the home of William Gossam House in Plum Springs area of Warren County. When the home was on tour for the Warren County Garden Club in 1953, members informed that Jeannie Lynn stayed there as a child, and a doll in one of her gloves was left behind and displayed proudly on the mantle. Lynn's first and only visit to the United States was in 1850, so this could not have been, she could not have visited when she was a child. If she had stayed at the Gossam House, she would not have traveled far because for the next day, her stop was Bell's Hotel. The spot has gone by different names. Historically, it's called Bell's Tavern. Today, it's known as Park City. Another name was the Three Forks because the route branched off in three different directions, Bowling Green, Glasgow, and Mammoth Cave. She arrived April 30th, 9 p.m. The moon was waxing crescent, so the visibility of the road would not have been good during that time. The hotel was run by William Bell, whose specialty was peach and honey, a type of brandy with those ingredients. The tavern burned down circa 1851, but the limestone ruins still stand like a Kentucky Stonehenge. Benedict described the lodgings as comfortable. Geraldine McMurray of Elizabethtown wrote an article for a magazine called Kentucky Progress about Lynn's travels and believed that she sang most of the guests there at Bell's Tavern. This probably did not happen, but in 1956, the players of the Western Kentucky State College created a musical based on Lynn's stay at Bell's Tavern called Concert at Three Forks. Dr. Howard Carpenter, the father of the filmmaker John Carpenter, directed the music. I've attempted to find a script or an eyewitness, but I've been able to learn what events or songs happened in the play. I did contact John Carpenter. He had no recollection of the musical. He didn't know where he'd even find it. Benedict, in his recount, didn't mention anything happening at Bell's Tavern. This is the only place that can be verified by Lynn as a place they stayed overnight. All the other mentions of her where she stayed overnight are all based on traditional accounts. The next morning, she deliberately diverted her route from Louisville to see one of the greatest natural features in the country, Mammoth Cave. This was the reason she took the stagecoach rather than a steamboat. Lynn was fascinated by rocks and stones. She once turned giddy over a piece of gravel from a driveway. Mammoth Cave, in fact, was used as an enticement to lure her to America. Benedict described they traveled over 8 miles of the worst roads they have ever traversed in the United States, charmingly broken up with snatches of woodland and forest scenery, and here bending past to the edge of a jagged and abrupted glen, and then break into a suite of mellow or budding forage to reach the hotel of the cave. The proprietor, Dr. John Corrigan, greeted them. Benedict described the hotel as dismal and queer-looking building, adding the roof of which was seamed with a chance skylight made by age and decay. He described the meal as excellent in the room where they ate in good order. Charles Shreve, a visitor to the cave, said 300, 400 people arrived because they heard she was coming and wanted to catch a glimpse of this famous singer. Benedict recounted that to avoid the precarious curiosity of the guest, Lynn was taken to a less frequented pathway than the one usually taken to its mouth. She was led by the famous African-American guide Stephen Bishop, the Prince of Guides, as he's been called. She took what was called today the Gothic tour, seeing the features such as the Star Chamber, the Giant's Coffin, Fat Man's Misery, and Happy Relief. And at that time, the so-called Devil's Armchair, Lynn allegedly sat in it, and it was rechristened Jenny Lynn's Armchair. Benedict never mentioned that account either. Shreve said that the others were in the Star Chamber, a principal trunk of the cave. The name comes from the white minerals that sparkle, mostly from the black ceiling. And they waited for Jenny Lynn there. As we stood there waiting, it occurred to me, according to Shreve, that it would be an event of a lifetime if Jenny Lynn could be prevailed upon to sing here in the Star Chamber, crowded as it was with several hundred people and beautifully illuminated. How her great voice, I thought, would fill the vaulted chamber with wondrous melody, and how its silvery tones would ring and reverberate through the distant caverns. My young fancy fairly carried me off to my feet with such idea. Shreve informed his friends of this idea, and they were all for it. They would ask her to sing, and she just couldn't refuse. Billy Vartese of Elizabethtown would be elected to approach her. When the songstress entered the Star Chamber, she was leaning on the arm of Benedetti, who Shreve said was her sweetheart. He added, Barnum's representative, presumably Charles Satan, I'm sorry to say, was not far behind. Shreve made him out to be the villain. Vartese approached her on his sweetest smile. He addressed the singer courtly and said that everyone here has traversed long distance to see and hear her. He emphasized how great and rare of an opportunity it would be to hear her sing, in this cave. Jenny Lynn smiled, Shreve recalled, and seemed to be hesitating while Barnum's agent drew nearer and looked unpleasant. Then the singer answered that her poor voice would sound but weak and out of place in such a wonderful cathedral made by the hands of God. She apologized for disappointing the people, but claimed her engagements with Barnum's were so exacting that she could not be compelled upon the request. Shreve said they felt flat and disappointed, but they understood and they had to live up to her agreement to Barnum. Regardless, Mammoth Cave would still claim she sang at the cave. They would boast that she sang in the Devil's Armchair. The silent corridors awoke to the golden voice of the Swedish nightingale as she sang the last rose of summer. Another account says she sang in the Echo River. Later, that'd be discredited because the Echo River was flooded at the time. Still, singing the Echo song on the Echo River does have a nice ring to it. Agatha Rochester Strange of Bowling Green was one of those disappointed. She wrote of Lynn's visit to her cave in her journal later in the year 1875. She described 20 youths of Bowling Green, both ladies and gentlemen, which traveled 41 miles in hopes of hearing her sing. We met her, Strange recounted, but after a request of the party, she would not sing a note. We felt vexed and thought that a bird that would not sing ought to be made to sing. Alice Gorham Taylor of Barron County, around the age of 84, wrote to the Courier Journal in 1929 about seeing Lynn at the cave when she was 5 years old. She remembered asking Lynn in the parlor in the hotel to sing. Lynn instead tapped her on the shoulder, which was taken as a friendly rebuke. Taylor and other children did play with Lynn's galoshes, presumably after the cave trip, that were left in the balcony. While the Swedish Nightingale did not sing, her piano player, Joseph Burke, had brought his instrument and played in the cave. Since he wasn't Lynn, this got little attention from the public or the press. People were paying fortunes to hear her sing, and for her to sing for free may not have pleased Barnum too much, or her, especially since she was raising money for charities for her singing and all that. And so what about all the people who were claiming to hear her sing? Were they just misremembering an early version of the Mandela effect? But the thing is, all these so-called witness accounts come from secondhand sources. Adriana St. Pierre, the curator of the Barnum Museum, doesn't give a clear-cut answer. She said Barnum's contract with her stated that for her to do 150 concerts over a period of 1 year for 8 to 18 months in the United States and Havana. She was able to decide how many per week, but not less than 2. And she could choose a number of pieces to sing, but not less than 4. This plan was regulated according to her health and voice. One clause stated she was free to sing for charity, but must consult Barnum. Lynn was known for her charity, donating thousands to such organizations as the New York Fire Department. She donated money for the construction of a Swedish Lutheran church in Andover, Illinois, which is now called the Jenny Lind Chapel. In fact, the main reason she agreed to the American tour was so that she could start a singing school in Sweden. Were these places in Kentucky and Tennessee her acts of charity? If so, she didn't get permission from Barnum. And usually when she sang, charity money was raised as well. The one fact that makes these accounts even more iffy is Mammoth Cave. Why would she decline singing there but not everywhere else? It seems disingenuous for Lynn. As a reminder, Mammoth Cave still claimed that she did sing there regardless. Benedict never mentions her singing any time between Nashville and Louisville. Lynn wrote letters, but if any exist of her accounts between Tennessee and Kentucky, they've yet to surface. Still, these tales of her impromptu stops in which she graciously volunteered to sing in the open, as stated in the July 25, 1929 Franklin Favorite, give her a favorable impression in the state. An Elizabethtown article stated she was probably the greatest artist who ever stopped in Elizabethtown, and such an event would be practically impossible to duplicate today. To be truthful, if not for these claims, such as at the Stagecoach Inn, I would never have developed an interest in the singer. I was puzzled by her route, couldn't understand why she left Nashville and went all the different ways she did, but detoured Russellville. And so I was wondering, was she avoiding Russellville? Did she have something against the town? And come to find out, that many of the stories are just not true. Returning to Elizabeth stop the next morning, Lynn and her party left the stagecoach. Samuel Bell Thomas, the owner of Stagecoach Line, drove the coach herself. Lynn is believed to have ridden with him on the driver's seat, passing through Radcliffe and seeing Mundren's Hill. When America's poet Barnell Taylor wrote of his travels through the spot, he described it as one of the most beautiful spots in the world. The next spot was the Young's Inn at West Point, also known as the mouth of the Salt River. Richard A. Briggs recounted this in his visit of her visit in Early History of West Point. All the town folks from Owls gathered outside the inn, where they all heard she was there, and one and all hoped to get a glimpse of the famous singer. Jenny Lind, gracious as ever, surprised the populace as she stepped to the door to the public room of the Young's Inn and stood on the steps and sang several selections to the crowd that gathered to hear her. The crowd was captivated by her and well pleased by her favoring them for 2 selections. Elizabeth Hayes is quoted as saying that she stood at the corner of her yard as a child listening to her sing Swanee River, which was not a song she was known for singing. And she was also known for singing Old Folks at Home, which is another song penned by Stephen Foster. This one possibly could have happened because the song was written in 1851, but is not known when Lynn would have encountered it. A historical marker at the site of the inn states that Jenny Lind sang on the steps there. When celebrating the West Point River Days Festival of 2015, a singer reenacts Lind singing on the steps. And from here, she left for Louisville. Jenny Lind is to be here next Monday, and we think our citizens should be making provisions for the purchase of her first concert tickets, so pronounced the Louisville Daily Journal. One gentleman, we learn, has announced he's intended to bid $250 at once, and the general impression is that we will take no competition for it. This will not do. 3 times as much has been paid elsewhere, our city would stand disgraced in the eye of the world if we should suffer such a prize as so pitiful as that. I find it interesting they were telling people to bid higher for her tickets when she came. Charles Sleeve, in his 20s at the time, the same one as at the Mammoth Cave, recounted in the 1901 interview with the Courier-Journal, for weeks before her coming, everyone in Louisville did nothing but talk about her. Businesses such as Colonel Hart and Company and Mammoth Clothing Company urged the public to update their fashion for the upcoming concert. Taylor and Raymond recommended opera glasses. Mr. J. Matthews' establishment promised new items of furniture intended for the apartment of Miss Jenny Lind. A butcher named Robert Usher recommended his premium rounds of spiced beef for all the Jenny Lind parties. A toy maker, John Gill, recommended attendees that even though they didn't bring their children, to not forget to bring a toy back for them. Peters Webb and Company, which were providing the piano for the concert, stated the piano would be for sale immediately after the last show. When the daughters of Senator Joseph Underwood heard of the news of Lind singing in Nashville, they wanted to go. The mother wrote to her husband in Washington, D.C. for permission. I do not think the girls ought to go to Louisville to hear Jenny Lind, the adamant Senator Underwood wrote. None of the foreign ministers in D.C. want to hear her when she was here. They laugh at the incredulous folly of our populace in encouraging such a man as Barnum to humbug them out of their money. I'm opposed to idolizing a mere singing girl who no doubt stands high in her profession, who'd be amply paid for her performances by a few $1,000s. He recommended that his daughters instead go to Mammoth Cave. People were paying fortunes to hear her sing. Wait. April 6th, as legend goes, Mayor John M. Delph, along with a group of prominent citizens, rode 10 miles out of Louisville on Elizabethtown Pike to meet her. 4 beautifully matched white horses were hitched to her coach, and she was triumphantly taken into the city, packed with people, bedazzled with buntings. This account does not show up in any of the newspapers of the time. Instead, this was told by Melville O. Brindley in his book, Foundation Recollections, which prevented this newspaper column. The book was published in 1915, over 100 years after her visit. Brindley was born in 1899, so this is not anything she would have witnessed firsthand. She may have misreported information from Charles U. Sleeve, the nephew of Levy and Lawrence Sleeve. His uncle had a large interest in the Louisville Hotel at the time, and according to his nephew's account in local papers, he was asked by his uncle to go to Mammoth Cave to talk to Jenny Lind about staying at the hotel. Charles' accounts of his visit to Mammoth Cave have been mentioned earlier. His encounters with Lind may not be accurate, but he does seem to misremember things. He further stated he stayed at Mammoth Cave for another night, and presumably so did Lind because her party followed behind him on the way to Louisville. That can't be correct because she left Mammoth Cave soon after visiting the cave. If Charles' party stayed overnight at Mammoth Cave, he would have been behind Lind instead. The newspaper had reported the Louisville Hotel had undergone repairs, and that was why Lind was instead taken to the elegant mansion of Mr. Levin Sleeve, who was also president of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. And his mansion was located at the corner of Center and Walnut Streets. And the rest of the staff stayed at the Exchange Hotel. We understand that our friend Sleeve was seen walking with Jenny Lind into the beautiful garden, as reported in the news, and presented with exquisite flowers to her and for gallantry of manner, which none, even us folks, young folks, can surpass. And he was seen as the envy of the town for this. The newspapers weren't exaggerating, though. Hundreds of persons stayed assembled in front of the house, and others walked by and rode, no doubt hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Legend would say that she sang from a window of the Sleeve house, but there's no report of this from the newspapers of the time. And he didn't mention her about singing from the house. In fact, she preferred to stay indoors, except for one time to go visit the garden. As with the Nashville auction was held, the premium ticket was bought by a Lewis Tripp, a professor of music who paid $175. Unlike J.G. Turner, who paid $200 in Nashville, this ticket does not seem to have been a publicity stunt. It seemed like because of professor of music, he was very interested in her. The cheapest seats sold for $3 for standees, and people were charged 10 cents just to attend the auction. And Barnum donated $180 to the mayor for the city poor. Of her 3 concerts at Mozart Hall on 4th and Jefferson Street, people were encouraged to arrive early. Rosenberg remarked on the rowdiness of the first concert. Many of the attendees brandished small pistols and Bowie knives. And unlike the mob at St. Louis, they were not, however, the most peaceful descriptions, and occasional rows diversified the external entertainment of the evening, he wrote. In one of them, I had the proud satisfaction of seeing a drunken white knock down 2 gentlemen of color. Shortly after, feeling inclined for better game, he struck at a white man who was standing near him. This individual polished him off in a short time and then consigned him to the care of the policeman. Barnum had hired a new tenor to sing, and he showed up at the second concert. Both singers delivered an exquisite duet charmingly, and the applause that was awarded them was once convinced us how much a concert would gain by presence of such artists. Charles Sieve and his sweetheart attended one of the shows. He recalled the number of flowers tossed into the stage. I've heard practically every great singer since this time, he recalled. Every great singer at that time, and I firmly believe that Jenny Lind is the greatest of them all. Nature made but one and broke the mold. Lind gave a total of 95 concerts under Barnum, not counting the free shows that she may or may not have given along the way. Barnum and Lind parted ways after Pittsburgh, but she continued singing in the United States, even across and in Canada. These concerts were smaller and usually without the hype and hoopla that Barnum gave to them. During that time, she got married. After her final concert in New York in 1852, she headed back to Europe and went into semi-retirement. Even though the Swedish Nightingale never passed through Logan County, her influence was still felt. Miss Jenny Lind Eder supervised the Moonlight Schools in the county here. If any Logan County attended her U.S. concerts in 1850, it has not been made publicly. T.H. Beckham of Russellville was in Louisville then. This could be Theodore Becker, who was a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars and settled Russellville. Whether he heard her sing is different matter. We don't know. At least 3 people from Bowling Green and another from Elkton were in town during those shows. One poetic tribute to Lind at her Louisville concert would be of great interest to Logan Countyans, and also the colony of Shakers who once lived and farmed here. It is reported in the Louisville Daily Times, one of the writers expressed his entire confidence that if the Shakers, who believe in the second coming of a female Christ, were to see and hear Jenny, they would have kneeled down and worshiped her at once. So there you go. And believe that's not all the stories about her. There are stories about her being in Eddyville. And I didn't even talk about the alternative route where she would have gone through Bardstown and Danville and supposed to have gone to Lexington, So there was like all these different stories about her that just kept, being told about her. And the mythology about her just, I grew fascinated by all the stories that were told about her. And in Boston, a fight broke out, and she got up on top of the tower and sang to the crowd, and the rioting stopped afterwards. So there was all these like myths and legends about her. And she still continues to fascinate people to this day. She pops up in movies, quite a bit. There was a movie about Hans Christian Andersen. There was supposed to be a love story behind those two. And then also about P.T. Barnum. Usually if there's anything about P.T. Barnum, Jenny Lind's going to be involved with it. And so there you go.